Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 5, Episode 4 of the WeCOACH podcast, presented by our partner, Huddle, on WIS Sports. Huddle is leveling the playing field for women in sports, both through the technology they create and important events like Breakthrough Summit, co-created with WeCOACH. All podcast episodes are inspired by collective input from our WeCOACH community. Please join us every 2 weeks for thought-provoking discussions focused on timely topics of national significance impacting the coaching profession. I'll be your host, Vanessa Fuchs, CEO of WeCOACH, a one-of-a-kind nonprofit dedicated to offering year-round growth and leadership development to recruit, advance, and retain women coaches in all sports and levels. This podcast is a co-production of WIS Sports and WeCOACH. WIS Sports is the only global podcast for women's sports with more than 2.7 million podcasts worldwide. We look forward to bringing you new shows dropping every other Thursday. Well, I'm fresh off my vacation in Hawaii, and I can't think of a better way to return to work than to record this podcast with you. We hope you tuned in on July 14th for part 1 of our 2-part series dedicated to July's BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, BIPOC Mental Health Awareness Month, intended to highlight the unique mental health challenges and needs of historically disenfranchised or oppressed racial and ethnic groups in the United States. This series is one small way WeCOACH can join in the effort to create awareness for BIPOC mental health. And today, we're continuing with part 2 of our series. Joining me is Dr. Kensa Gunter, a licensed psychologist and certified mental performance consultant who's based in Atlanta. Through her private practice, Dr. Gunter provides individual counseling, mental skills training, and consultation services to athletes, teams, and organizations. She has worked with individuals at various levels of competition, including high school, collegiate, and professional athletes. Dr. G, thank you for being here today. We look forward to this conversation.
Hi, Vanessa. Thank you so much. It is my pleasure to be here. I thank you for the invitation, and I, too, am looking forward to our conversation.
Well, the honor is ours. So we're going to go ahead and dive right in. I've done quite a bit of research on you and impressive work that you do, important work that you do. And in your work, you talk quite a bit about humanizing mental health, recognizing that culture impacts perception and experience. And because of this, you're intentional to acknowledge the importance of individual cultural identities as well as the cultural context in which a person performs and lives. As our WeCOACH community and podcast listeners seek to learn more about BIPOC mental health awareness, can you elaborate on this for us?
Absolutely. I think, this notion of talking about mental health, particularly at the intersection of sport with our athletes and coaches, is something that I think is at the top of mind for us, particularly given the last couple of years and all the things that we have experienced. And so when I talk about the concept of humanizing mental health, it refers to just that, talking about mental health in the context of the lived experiences that people have and understanding that certainly in the realm of sport, we are working with performers, but there's a person at the core of every performance and every performer. And so what we really want to do is understand who is the person that we're working with in the realm of mental health, in the realm of mental performance. Who is this person from an individual standpoint? And that includes the cultural identities that they hold, the intersection of identities, whether we're talking about race, gender, sexual identity, relationship status, nationality, age, and a host of other cultural identities that they may hold. It's important for us to understand what identities are important to a person, because that helps us to understand who they are and then what kind of work may be most beneficial for us to do together. When you talk about the cultural context, I think what's important there is understanding that we as people are impacted by the things that happen in us, the things that happen to us, and the things that happen around us. And so in addition to understanding who a person is from a cultural standpoint and using a cultural lens, we also have to think about the contexts in which they live and they operate. And so that's not only their social and familial context, but also thinking about the context of the sport that they may be participating in, the context of the university or college that they may be attending, or the organization or team that they are playing for, and then understanding the cultural context of society at large, because the intersection of all these contexts in addition to the intersections of who this person is, shape their experiences that they have in the world. It shapes their perception of the world's perception of them. And we need to think on all of those levels when it comes to humanizing the discussion about mental health and really honoring the lived experience that we're really talking about when we speak about mental health and mental performance.
That's so good. We really want this podcast to be educational for our WeCOACH community. And this is a topic that has continued in my short 4 months on the job, continued to come up with our women coaches. And so as you talk about humanizing mental health, can we talk a little bit about resources? Because I hear often from coaches, they're not always sure where to turn for more education, resources, training, best practice as it relates to mental health and emotional well-being so that they can be the best support that they can be for their athletes. You know, when I was at Florida State, we were fortunate. We had a full-time mental health specialist within athletics, and she emphasized and reiterated the importance to not only our student athletes, but to our coaches and staff that your mental health is equally as important as your physical health. And so while this is a growing trend, it seems like schools are hiring more and more mental health specialists within their athletics departments, especially in Division I. We have to realize not all athletics departments have this benefit. And so from your experience, Dr. G, could you just share a little bit about, based on what's available on most campuses, what's available in local communities, maybe national resources online through different apps? Where can coaches turn for these resources?
So I think there are a couple of different levels of resources that might be really helpful here for coaches to develop or expand their knowledge and their skill set in this area. So one, when I think about mental health, on many college and university campuses, there is a college counseling center. You know, certainly depending upon Division I, II, III, or different levels, they may be resourced differently. But if there is a counseling center on your campus, then that may be a good first step, because one of the things that they could do is provide basic information, kind of a mental health 101, to give you basic information about what mental health is, talking about the continuum of mental health, maybe giving you some information about signs and symptoms to look for that may indicate that someone is experiencing distress, but also giving you information about proactive skills and techniques that people could use in order to maintain or even enhance their mental health and wellness. And so that may be the first place. If you don't have a counseling center on your campus, then my guess is that there may be mental health professionals within your community that would be willing to come in and potentially offer some information or provide a talk or a conversation about mental health as well. And so there are a couple of different places that you may be able to look for that. The Association for Applied Sports Psychology has a Find a Consultant feature on their website where you can find mental performance coaches in your area. Some of those mental performance consultants are also clinically trained, so they may be able to provide information about mental health. And what I'll do is I'll provide you with some of these links that you can include in your show notes. But that's one area of thinking through mental health. And then there's some national trainings as it relates to mental health. QPR is Question, Persuade, Refer. It's a gatekeeper program that was initially designed to help people become more comfortable asking about and talking about suicidal type behaviors. But certainly it's a way to equip someone who's not trained in this area to be more comfortable asking questions, to be more knowledgeable about signs and symptoms that may indicate distress, so that we can all take some role in creating healthier environments. There's also a program called Mental Health First Aid, and it's a skill-based training course that teaches participants about mental health and substance use issues. And again, they provide general information about different types of mental health conditions, but also they provide some skills that allow someone to think about how to intervene. So that's the mental health piece. But then when we think about the cultural competence piece, because as we're in BIPOC Mental Health Awareness Month, it's important for us to think about that cultural context And there are many books and resources that exist that can help us think about working with culturally diverse populations, right? And certainly when I say that, there is no way that we can be versed in all of the many different cultural identities that folks may hold, or the intersections that may manifest in all the individuals that we come across. But it is important for us to think through culturally, where are my blind spots? What are the areas and aspects of identity that I'm most comfortable with? What are those that I don't think about at all? That starts with a level of awareness about our own identities, and then deliberate efforts to develop and increase our knowledge about those cultural groups that we may not be as familiar with. And so again, I can share some resources about books and potentially podcasts that share information, particularly about that cultural piece, because I think we have to do both in tandem. We can't just look at mental health. We can't just look at culture, but if we want to enhance our awareness and our knowledge base, we need to be expanding our internal skill set and our knowledge base around both of those areas simultaneously.
That's fantastic. And thank you for those resources. I myself personally have completed QPR training, and it's an incredible resource. Thank you also for sharing some resources specific to supporting our BIPOC community. And we would gladly accept links to these resources so we can upload those on our website at the time that we upload this podcast for our listeners and our community. So thank you for that. You know, in 2020, I'd like to talk with you about your role now as director of the NBA Mind Health Program. In 2020, you were hired into that role. And can you talk about the Mind Health Program and what your role entails?
Yeah, so the Mind Health Program is essentially the league's mental health and wellness platform. And through Mind Health, we have the opportunity to work with all of our player leagues. So that includes the NBA, but also the WNBA, our G League teams, our 2K teams in our 2K League, and our Basketball Africa League, in terms of providing some basic information about mental health to our participants and our staff that work with that league. We also have the opportunity to provide some resources related to mental health to our coaches through our Coaches Association. We've engaged with providing information to our referees, and we've also collaborated with our league HR in order to provide resources to our league staff as well. And so essentially what we are trying to do is infiltrate mental health and infiltrate the department, all of our departments, with information and knowledge about wellness and about mental health. And so we do that by providing workshops. We will provide printed kind of one-page resources about different topics. Certainly when things have happened, for example, with the passing of Kobe Bryant and the other individuals in the helicopter crash, like providing information about managing grief and loss. Certainly when COVID became kind of at its peak and its height here in the States, providing information about managing uncertainty and working with some of our medical staff about educating around COVID and sometimes about the emotional and the psychological impacts. And so we try to provide point in time resources. We try to provide general information and resources about mental health and about mental performance. And so we have a league-based kind of steering committee that is involved in kind of their strategic planning and creating guidelines and recommendations and requirements as it relates to the Mind Health Program. And the way we extend to our teams is that as of now, all of our NBA teams, our WNBA teams, and our G League teams are required to have a relationship with a designated mental health professional. For some of our teams, that looks like a person that is hired as a full-time staff member. For other teams, it is a contracted service. Regardless of what the arrangement is, that person has to be available for our players and in many cases for our team staff on an as-needed basis. In other instances, we also have situations where those professionals provide educational resources and educational services as well to our teams. The goal there being that we understand intuitively when we think about sport, we understand the importance of taking care of your physical health, and we want the importance of taking care of your mental health to be as reflexive as it is as the thoughts about taking care of your physical health. And so one of the ways is to kind of make sure that we have a resource in place that's designed to do that. And so within Mind Health, our vision statement, if you will, is, again, you've heard it before, to humanize mental health and to position it as an essential element of success and wellness, both on and off the court. And our kind of 3 touchstones, if you will, are humanizing mental health, elevating performance, and then honoring lived experience. And so we really try to stay true to those tenets in all of the work that we do through that program.
Phenomenal. I really admire the NBA and WNBA's leadership to prioritize mental health in support of its players and staff that you mentioned. I love that they're also making that resource available for staff as well. You know, there's a national effort to destigmatize mental health in sport. And so I'm wondering what your experience has been working in the pro space. Are the athletes and staff bought in? It sounds like they are, with the leadership role that the league has taken. But how do you get athletes to buy in to seeking mental health support? How do you get coaches to buy in to seeking mental health support? And can you share what you feel is most critical as we advance these efforts to destigmatize mental health in athletics?
Yeah, so the concept of buy-in and the concept of kind of how do you get them to use the service, I think, is an interesting one, because quite honestly, I think that it is the athletes and their courage and the vulnerability that they have shown in sharing their stories over the last few years. I think that is what's actually propelled this movement forward as it relates to conversations about the intersection of mental health and sport. I think about years ago, I think about Shaniqua Holsclaw and her sharing her story, her story kind of publicly playing out in some ways, but then her intentionally sharing her story and her mental health journey. I think that was really groundbreaking at the time. And then if we move a little bit more recently, we think about DeMar DeRozan in 2018 and the tweet that he posted as it related to depression, and how that then created a pathway, if you will, for Kevin Love to share more about his story. And then we have professional athletes in other spaces, from Simone Biles to Naomi Osaka to Michael Phelps to Liz Cambage to a host of other athletes who have over the last several years publicly shared their stories as it relates to mental health, right? And so I truly think, as opposed to thinking about how do we get the athletes to buy in, the question has become, or whether the statement is, athletes are telling us that they want to be seen as more than just performers. They are telling us about these very real experiences that they are having as it relates to their mental, emotional, psychological health and well-being. What are we going to do to make sure that resources are in place and to be responsive to a need that they are telling us exists, and to see them as the full people that they are, and not continue to look at them as performers to the exclusion of who they are as a person, right? And so I really think that it is athletes and coaches as well. Some coaches have come out and shared their stories too, but I think it is because they are asking for us to see them as people, that has created the movement of what are we doing to make sure that we're honoring that and to make sure we have resources in place. I think that has fueled the movement that we see in sport. And so I think that's why you see more positions in college spaces, collegiate spaces, particularly if I think about Division I spaces. I think within pro sport, you also see movement. The NFL also has a very similar recommendation that all the teams have to have a designated mental health professional that's available to work with them. And Major League Baseball has a lot of mental performance consultants, and also they're increasing in terms of their mental health services that they have available to their players as well. And so we're seeing it on a number of levels. The USOPC, the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, definitely has hired several mental health professionals within the past year, specifically to build out their mental health resources. And so I think the question really becomes, if we think about sport atmospheres and environments, we have to be more intentional about investing financial resources, time, energy, and effort to make sure that athletes have access to what they need. And what they need goes beyond resources to enhance their performance. It's resources to support them as people. And so I think when you talk about buy-in, one, having somebody who's connected to a team, I think is helpful because that person becomes a part of the team. And when you think about the work that we do in the mental health and the mental performance space, relationships are important. Relationships are built over time. Relationships need trust. In order to do that, a person needs to be around. So if we create space, one, for the resource to be present, two, for them to be visible, three, for them to be accessible, and four, we have to have a level of cultural competence in the folks that we are talking about. Not only competence in terms of the cultural identities, because we know there's a wide range of folks that participate in sport, but also thinking about the nuances of the athletic subculture and understanding what an athlete's experience is. So having training and working within the realm of sport, within the athletic subculture, also becomes a level of cultural competence, in addition to understanding the diverse communities that one may work within the realm of sport. So I think athletes are bought into wanting the resource. It's on us now to make sure that the resource is available and is truly something that's accessible to them.
I love that you brought up the athletes' leadership in this, and by their courage to share their stories and help in the effort to humanize mental health, but also to help others see them as people and persons first. I actually benefited from hearing Shamika Holzclaw's story. She came to the ACC Mental Health Summit a few years back, and just powerful. Really believe that their leadership and their willingness to model the way for others does help for those youth and young adults who are watching them as role models, make them understand it's important, and it's something that there shouldn't be any shame in seeking out these resources, and it's critically important for our well-being that we utilize mental health resources. I want to shift gears. Go ahead.
And I think before you shift gears, I just want to say the other thing. There are 2 points came to mind for me. And one is certainly the athletes at these elite levels who are sharing their stories are serving as models for younger athletes, but also thinking about the way they're serving as models for all of us, right? Because the athletes that I mentioned, these are athletes who have excelled in their sport. And so I think that's the other message that's being communicated here is that if you experience a mental health challenge or struggle or have a diagnosable mental health condition, that does not have to prevent you from being successful and productive and performing exceptionally well in any capacity, right? It's not that these athletes are talking about how managing their mental health got in the way of their success journeys. It's almost because they were able to manage and take care of and prioritize their mental health. That's a part of what allowed them to move forward in their success journeys. And I think that's a really important piece, because historically, particularly in the world of sport, anything that came up in the realm of mental health related concern, challenge, difficulty might result in one being labeled as weak, right? Or not able to cut it, or the opposite of mentally tough, right? And I think there's a very powerful message in that it is not so much that the successful athlete is one who has no challenges and struggles. The successful elite athlete is one who learns how to manage and navigate them, right? And does so at times with assistance from other people, right? They don't try to go it alone. I think the other thing that I wanted to share is I mentioned a lot of professional athletes, but there are a lot of collegiate athletes too who are courageously sharing their stories as well. And I don't want to overlook that in addition to the professional athletes whose names we might more readily know, there are a lot of movements within the college space to also bring awareness to the fact that they too are people first, and they too want to be seen in the fullness of who they are and want to have access to resources to support their overall development, not just their development as an athlete or performer.
You mentioned the importance of these pro athletes and the role that they're playing. But as you mentioned and credited the collegiate athletes, when I was at Florida State, we had a volleyball student athlete, Marissa Stockman, who came to our administration and advocated that we implement during one of our matches last season, during the fall of 2021. This was her idea. She implemented our very first ever mental health awareness match. And not only did she help us execute that on FSU's campus, she then challenged the rest of the ACC fall sports to do the same. And I couldn't be more proud of her. And there's actually some articles that highlight her leadership in implementing that initiative for us. But, you talk about some of these athletes who, because they've prioritized mental health just as much as they've prioritized their physical health, that they've been able to rise up to the most elite levels in their sport. So let's talk a little bit about that, the relationship between health and performance and being able to elevate your performance. So in addition to your role as director of the NBA's Mind Health program, you also are a certified mental performance consultant. And can you explain a little bit more about this aspect of your work and how mental performance is different than your role as a licensed psychologist?
Absolutely. And so the way I like to think about it is kind of mental health and mental performance are two separate and different domains, but they certainly influence one another. And in terms of the professionals that work in the spaces, there's certainly a lot of collaboration that can happen. And so when we think about a licensed mental health professional, we typically think about someone who is trained to diagnose and treat mental illness or mental health disorders. And so those diagnosable conditions that you may think of: depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorders, eating disorders, substance use disorders. A person who is a licensed mental health professional is trained to treat, diagnose and treat those particular conditions. And it doesn't even have to be to a diagnosable level, but certainly if someone is experiencing a level of disruption in their life because of different signs and symptoms and experiences that they're having, they might seek a mental health professional to help them address that. And that's in the health realm, right? Kind of primarily thinking about the health realm. A mental performance consultant is someone who primarily through educational means teaches different mental skills to help someone restore, maintain, or enhance their performance. And so when I talk about mental skills, what I'm talking about are things like goal setting, self-talk, imagery and visualization, learning how to regulate your emotions, energy management, if you will, and kind of how to maintain and manage your energy over the course of a competition. Mental performance consultants work with athletes and performers kind of over the range of their training cycle. So they may work with them during the training phase. They may work with them prior to competition to develop pre-competition routines. They may work with them during the competition and certainly post-competition to evaluate kind of how the strategies work and to make any adjustments that need to be made. But when I think about mental performance consultants, again, these are individuals who are coming in to particularly work on addressing the mental side of someone's game. And so when we talk about health and performance, we know that they impact one another, right? That one's health may impact their ability to perform, and one's performance may impact how they feel in terms of their health. They're not the same thing, but they certainly can influence one another. And we also know that within this, depending on whether or not somebody feels mentally healthy or mentally ill, can also have an impact on all of it. And so the mental performance side of the work that I do really rests in that educational, that skills building and educational realm where I am working towards teaching specific skills to help folks make sure that their head is in the game when they need it to be in the game the most. And again, you can pair this mental skills training with their physical skills training. You can engage in the training separately, but it really is to make sure that things like their focus, their attention, their confidence, their motivation, their self-talk, their ability to connect and be cohesive with their team, those are the types of skills that we work on within the mental performance space. And that is separate from whether or not they have a mental health condition or not. They may not have that at all, but still it's this idea that you don't have to be performing poorly in order to work on improving and to get better, right? And so that's kind of one of the things we think about in mental performance. And in the same way that in the physical realm, you may have athletic trainers, strength and conditioning coaches, and you also have your orthopedic doctor. That's kind of how you can think about mental performance and a mental health clinician, a licensed mental health professional is. The mental performance consultant is going to help with the maintenance, the enhancement, and might even help to restore, for example, someone who's experiencing an injury. Mental skills can be helpful in them kind of restoring their confidence as they go through rehab and return to competition. But really, we think about mental health as dealing with the diagnosable conditions, and mental performance is dealing with skills building that helps to make sure their mental game is matched with their physical performance in their physical game.
Thank you for distinguishing the two. I want to talk a little bit about coaches, and we tend to acknowledge the need for these athletes to pursue services, but it's not just important only for the athletes, but also for our coaches. And I think coaches tend to be so others oriented that there's a tendency to forget to cover home base, to take care of home base. And so what do you feel are the obstacles that get in the way of coaches reaching out for help? And what are your suggested strategies to address those obstacles?
Yeah, I think coaches are one of our most underserved communities within the world of sport. I think there is so much demand, expectation, and responsibility that's placed on our coaches, but I'm not sure how much training and support is offered, not just to enhancing their ability to be a coach, but how much support and information is poured into making sure that they as people are healthy as well. In the same way that we talk about athletes are people first and that there's a person in every performer, coaches are people first too. And there's a person in every coach. And I think one of the things that we tend to do is just expect that the coach is going to be okay. And we just want to make sure that they're equipped to provide everything that we want them to provide for their athletes. But I think we really should be conscious of taking a step back and really talking to the coach about the importance of their health and well-being and them taking care of themselves as well. And this may be a very novel concept for many coaches to think about, because coaches are givers, they are doers, they sacrifice themselves. Like you said, they're other focused, and they usually sacrifice any attention toward themselves and direct that towards ensuring that their athletes are okay. And I think we owe a tremendous amount of thanks to coaches because of the level of dedication, commitment, time, energy, and sacrifice that they give and they engage in their roles as coaches. But to your question, like, how do we get them to buy in? I think it's understanding that the coach generally is the person who sets the tone for their team. When we think about this notion of culture, and we talk about culture a lot on teams, what's the culture of your team, kind of what characterizes who your team is, a lot of that sometimes starts with the coach. And so what we can share, what is certainly making sure that the X's and O's are in place is important. Wins and losses are important, but health and wellness is important too. And if we can take some time to check in with our coaches, to give them education about how to take care of themselves in an increasingly demanding role, I think that goes a long way, because I think when coaches start to see how mental health and wellness and well-being strategies and mental performance strategies even are important for them, then that gives them buy-in to understand why this might be important for their athletes, right? If we can help them to understand how we can help you to maybe be healthier in this role as coach and even potentially enhance your coaching capacity, then they may see how, oh, if these skills are beneficial for me, then I can see how they may be beneficial for my team as well. And so I think the buy-in has to come from not just focusing on pouring into the coach in order for the coach to be a better coach and to be better at their job, but pouring in the coach for the sake of the coach being healthy, right? Because they set the tone. They generally are the ones who create the environment. And a healthy sport environment is one that can absolutely support progress and wins and when things are going well. But the healthiest of environments can also support disappointments, failures, the space, and allow space for learning and growing and adversity as well, right? Healthy environments allow room for all of that, and they can hold and support all of that. It's not just one or the other. And so in order to do that, I think equipping our coaches to think about their health and wellness, how that impacts them and their lives, and then also how it impacts the team environment that they create for their athletes is really important. Because again, we want our coaches to be healthy when they're on the court and also when they're off the court too. And I think being more intentional about saying that explicitly is really, really a way to start to focus on their caring for themselves and to have this conversation and increase the buy-in.
That's fantastic, and couldn't agree more. We talk often and encourage and praise our coaches. Thank you, coaches, for the fact that they have the ability to have the most influential impact on a young person's life. And so for them to model the way and model these healthy behaviors for their student athletes is also critically important. Let's talk about some trends. You serve on numerous national boards and are a member of professional psychological associations, and just curious if there's any evolving trends that you think would be worth noting for our coaches.
I think one of the biggest trends that I'm seeing is this increased conversation about not only mental health for individuals, but also thinking about the organizational health of our teams, our campuses, our the environments that we create. I think one of the things that we have historically done in conversations about mental health is we've relegated it to just being an individual phenomenon, right? And so what we will do then is talk about an individual's struggles and challenges. And if that individual gets the help that they need or can develop the skills, then that individual will be okay. And I think one of the trends that I'm really seeing within this mental health and performance conversation is, yes, we do need to make sure that support is in place for the individual, but we also need to think about what is the environment that we're cultivating, and are the environments that we're cultivating within the world of sport, are they healthy and nourishing, or are they draining and depleting? And the analogy that comes to mind for me there is kind of the analogy of a garden, right? If I plant flowers in a rock bed, can I really be upset that the flowers aren't growing? Right. And I've used that analogy, and I had someone say, yeah, but what if the plant is a cactus? I'm like, that's great. The cacti might grow, but everybody's not a cactus. Right. And so we have to think about, are we creating environments and creating nurturing environments that are allowing all of the folks in our programs to grow? Right? Us, our assistant coaches, our coaches, players, like, are we creating environments that are really conducive to allowing folks to thrive? And I've also heard kind of, questions about this approach in terms of thinking about maybe some of the ways that coaching was engaged in historically, right? This idea of tough love coaching, if you will, or, there was a time when in coaching, we didn't have to really attend to the emotional health and well-being of our athletes. Like, we really were able to just come in and kind of focus on the X's and O's and focus on our collective goal of performing and winning. And that was that. And I would maintain that mental health has always been around, and mental health has always been important to the lives of the athletes and to the lives of the coaches. We just didn't talk about it. And in not talking about it, I don't think that creates a better environment. It just creates an environment where people are silenced, they're holding on to more, and there may be more disruption and distress in their personal lives, right? And so this idea of focusing on the total person as a way of creating healthy sport environments, I think, is really the biggest trend that I'm seeing, is focusing on the total person and also focusing on ensuring that the environment and the culture we're creating is also one that's healthy, is really, that's really been on the forefront of conversations that I've had and of trends that I'm seeing, particularly as it relates to this mental health and sport intersection.
I love the analogy to the garden. Thank you for that. And your comments are a great segue into what we want to talk about next, which is, are we creating an environment that allows others to thrive? And so I wanted to talk with you a little bit about your experience. You've worked with clients participating at every level of athletics. So what are some of the characteristics that you've observed coaches and leaders demonstrate that show their support to not only their athletes, but to the staffs that work closely with them as it relates to mental health and well-being? And if you have any specific examples that you think might be beneficial for our WeCOACH community, please feel free to share those.
Yeah, that's a great question. And let me see if I can kind of narrow down some of those core characteristics that I've seen. I think one of the first is they're authentic and vulnerable. And what I mean by that is certainly that they're real. And by the vulnerable, I don't mean that I've seen coaches kind of share their entire life stories with everybody on their team. But what I mean is, it's when you interact with them, you feel like you're interacting with a person, right? A person who sees the person in other people, right? And makes room for that. They are not only trying to get the most out of them in terms of what their skill set is and what their talent level is, and what they're capable of producing on whatever field of play we're talking about. But these are folks who also know their athletes as people. So they can check in with them about what's going on with their their siblings or their families or some hobby or interest that they know that they have. They show an interest in the person beyond what they can contribute to the team. And I think when you have that kind of atmosphere, you're able to challenge someone and push someone and criticize someone and give them some hard feedback because they understand that that's coming from a place of, yes, trying to get the most out of them, but not in this kind of, I'm focusing on you as the performer at the exclusion of who you are, right? Like they're able to know that person in context, and they're able to push and pull on people in ways that they know will resonate with their athletes. And so in order to do that, you have to know them. So they really do get to know them, establish true relationships, and they communicate. They have conversations so relationships and treating them as people, that authenticity and vulnerability is one. Being able to communicate is two, and communicating regularly, like communicating about not only where you need to improve and what I want you to work on, but also communicating and praising them when things go well, like communicating them on and praising them when progress is made, and also providing clarity around what their role is on team, what the expectations are, what they are looking for, so that the athlete does not have to walk around confused and wondering. That communication goes a long way towards helping people understand what's expected so that they can appropriately channel their energy and their effort and give what it is that they're expected to give. And maybe even more than that, but that clarity gives them a pathway to work with. I think the other two things that stand out for me, and they're kind of related, are these notions of empathy and this notion of humility, right? So understanding, trying to understand where everyone is coming from, even knowing that we are all coming together towards one purpose, right? Still making room for their folks to be the individuals that they are while we are collectively coming together to work towards this common goal. In that way, I think about it as like a puzzle pieces, right? Some of the most effective coaches that I have seen and observed and worked with kind of recognize we're all different puzzle pieces, right? And as a puzzle piece, we're all unique and we're all different. We bring different skills to the table. We have different weaknesses. We have different strengths. We have different growth edges. We have different talents. We have different ways of interacting and engaging. But every piece of the puzzle is needed in order for us to have a complete picture. And so they allow room for every puzzle piece to be different, knowing that the goal is to bring those pieces together so that they can have a complete picture that works for everyone. And so I think that too becomes a really important strength of a coach. So that authenticity and vulnerability, which leads to the development of very real relationships, the ability to communicate often and effectively about the challenges and about the successes. And then also this level of kind of empathy and humility and understanding and allowing room for the different puzzle pieces on their team and still creating momentum towards all of the pieces wanting to come together to make the collective picture that allows all of them to be successful and move towards their desired collective and shared goals.
Those core characteristics, that's some great insight: authenticity, vulnerability, empathy, humility. And I think another way that coaches can help in modeling the way is this concept of self-care and how they can practice self-care. And, you know, Dr. G, I don't know how you do it between your private practice, supporting the NBA, serving on numerous boards, and then you also have shared a little about yourself, self-described sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes fanatic. You enjoy being in nature. You enjoy spending time with your family. But I feel this phrase of self-care sometimes is misunderstood. A lot of people think, it means you got to go take a vacation to practice self-care. So can you give some advice here? How can coaches and student athletes practice self-care? And is self-care something that people can do proactively to maintain and enhance their mental wellness?
Oh, 100%. And I will say this straight up. I talk about self-care, and I think self-care is very, very important. And it is one of the hardest things for me to do, right? So even as I'm about to talk to you about how you might be able to think about it, I recognize that it sometimes can be really, really challenging to carve out times for ourselves. But when I think about self-care, or if you want to say it differently, because sometimes that phrase of self-care, for some people that feels like it's selfish, right? Like, I don't know if I want to focus on myself. So I think about it as, how are you integrating kind of wellness into your daily life? What are you doing to refuel, recharge, and re-energize yourself on a regular basis, right? You don't even have to think about it as self-care, but asking that question, because we expend energy in the different activities that we engage in on a daily basis. And if we're not doing anything to recharge, re-energize, and replenish ourselves, then that is a fast track to being exhausted, depleted, and potentially feeling a sense of burnout. And so what I ask people to think about is, what are you doing to recharge? And you can't just recharge every now and then, right? You will notice I love speaking in analogies because I think that communicates the point. I imagine everybody who's listening right now, or many people who are listening right now, have some type of device that they use on a regular basis, whether it's a tablet, a computer, a smartphone, a watch, something that you might need to charge in order for it to work properly, right? And so you think about that device that you have. You do not charge that device on Sunday and then expect it to work for the rest of the week without ever charging it again, right? At a minimum, we probably charge our devices overnight, but sometimes we've used it so much during the day that we might have to charge it for a moment during the day so that it can continue to work for the duration of our work days, whatever that may look like. And so that's the same thing that we have to think about for ourselves. What are we doing to recharge? And wellness exists in many, many different domains. So there's physical wellness, mental and emotional wellness, social, spiritual, occupational, like intellectual wellness. So we have to think about, what are we doing in a number of different ways to help refuel and recharge ourselves. You already said, for me, I am a sci-fi, fantasy, speculative fiction fanatic. So whether I'm watching something on Netflix or reading something, that's a way that I recharge. If I can take time to engage in that type of activity, it really is recharging and rejuvenating for me. I do love to hike. It's been incredibly hot here in Atlanta, so I have not done that much lately. But movement is really important, whether that is a walk around my neighborhood, whether that is yoga or Pilates in my living room, whether that is hopping on a Peloton bike that right now is collecting more dust than anything else, but it's there. And so if I want to hop on it, I can. But thinking about the ways in which we are integrating movement into our lives. You said my social support system, really important for me. And so talking to my family, talking to my friends is really important. And if I think about the last couple of years, that was a challenge over the last couple of years in terms of being able to see people because of the state of the world and what we were navigating with the pandemic that we're still in. But certainly we had different restrictions around our movement a few years ago or a few months ago. But it's important for everybody listening to ask yourself, what is it? What activities, when I'm around what people, do I feel recharged, re-energized? And then ask yourself, how often do I engage in those activities? Right? Because identifying your wellness activities, great. But if you don't do them, you don't get the benefit of them. And so when I think about self-care, when I think about our recharge, rejuvenation activities, one, we have to be first, we have to be aware of what they are, aware of what it is that makes me feel recharged. Two, we have to be intentional about carving time out in our schedule to do them, whatever those activities may be. And you don't have to do the activity. You don't have to have an hour. All you need is 10 minutes, 15 minutes, right? So how often do I do them? How regularly am I doing them? And then ask yourself, do I feel recharged afterwards? And if you don't, you might need to explore, well, that might not be recharging me as much. What is recharging to me, right? But we have to be aware of what we need. We have to be intentional about doing it because we are human beings, not human doings. And so we need to be able to pause, to recharge, have moments where we are not so focused on productivity, work, responsibility, expectations, where we can actually allow ourselves to be replenished and recharged and restored. There has historically been this idea that the way to success is to grind, hustle, work, move, give 150% at all times. That's a recipe for burnout, and that's a recipe for exhaustion, and that's not a recipe for sustained excellence. Rest and recovery are a part of our success journeys. They are not separate from it. And so we have to expand our idea of the role of rest, recovery, wellness, self-care in allowing us to be productive instead of thinking that it's a roadblock to our productivity. It really is one of the things that fuels our sustainable excellence and performance.
Thank you for those examples. And, it's certainly something I'm personally working on, this concept of practicing self-care pausing and recharging as I continue my journey with WeCOACH and transitioning to this new role. It's something I think about often, but you mentioned the pandemic. I actually learned and taught myself to cook during the pandemic. And that's one of my ways that I can recharge. And if you think about it, other than following a recipe on my phone, I can't be on my phone when I'm cooking in the kitchen. So that's one way that I've discovered has been really beneficial for me. I also, was certified in scuba diving. And I didn't realize this, but the breathing you have to practice under the water as part of scuba diving is very therapeutic. And helps with some of that rest and relaxation. So those are two ways that, through the pandemic that I've actually learned new ways, for myself to recharge. But as we talk about pausing and recharging, I did read an article. You talked about the NBA and WNBA players engaging in activism and advocacy work, and you acknowledge the emotional toll that work that goes along with this important work. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about checking in. What does that look like, and how does one check in?
Yeah, I think it's important. I think that advocacy work that you're talking about, the WNBA just last night at the ESPYs was named the Humanitarian League of the Year, I think. And so that just speaks to the ways in which they are not only engaged in doing things in their personal lives, but they're engaged and they're involved in their community and through different forms of activism and advocacy. And again, I think we've seen the same thing with the NBA. And we've seen it with a lot of athletes as well. And I think, but before I answer the question, I want to say that, this advocacy and activism, I think, is important as we're, again, thinking about the fact that we're in BIPOC Mental Health Awareness Month. People are often engaged in initiatives, activities, endeavors that speak to them, right? And again, so when we think about our athletes and the identities that they hold, a lot of our athletes are engaged in these activities because they speak directly to who they are as people, right? And these are issues that are salient for them, those in their community, and they're passionate about them. And I think for any of us, when we're engaged in different civic type endeavors or like civic engagement and civic responsibility, it's great to be involved in your community. That's important for us to think about, not only how are we taking care of ourselves, but how are we taking care of each other. But yes, to your point, it can have a toll. And so when this idea of checking in, I think one is having an awareness of what your baseline is. So your baseline in terms of your feeling and when you might be reaching points where you are overextending yourself or where you may need to step back in order to engage in more recharging. So you said, how do you check in? I think you can ask yourself a few questions. One is, what am I thinking? How am I feeling? And what do I need in this moment? Because the ways in which stress or being overextended may manifest can look different for all of us. For some of us, it may look like it may manifest in our thinking. The way we think and the type of thoughts we have may tend to be more in the negative direction when we find ourselves being stressed or a bit overwhelmed. Physically, for a lot of people, our emotions can manifest as muscle tension, headaches, gastrointestinal issues, feelings of exhaustion and fatigue, right? Behaviorally, it may look like us withdrawing from our friends and from social settings. It may look like us spending more time alone. It may look like us not engaging in some of those wellness practices that we would typically engage in if we felt and were in a different place, if we felt better and were in a different place. So I think the check-in is just pause for a second and ask yourself, what am I thinking in this moment? How am I feeling in this moment? And what, if anything, do I need in this moment? And just kind of developing the habit of asking yourself to get a gauge of where you are in any given moment, I think is important. Every time you ask yourself, sometimes you might ask those questions and you might be, I'm actually good. That's okay. That is allowed. Every time you check in, it doesn't mean that there's a problem. But again, it's just important for us to get in the habit of being aware of, where am I mentally today? Where am I emotionally today? Because then that allows you to also ask, what, if anything, do I need in this moment, so that you can be a bit more proactive about attending to your needs rather than only attending to them when you're in a moment of distress or when you've reached that breaking point, whatever it may be.
Thank you for that. WeCOACH community, we challenge you, each one of you listening, to go do something that recharges you. And please, as we go forward, be mindful to check in with yourselves, take care of yourselves. Dr. Kenza Gunter, we appreciate you so much for discussing this critically important topic with us and pouring into our WeCOACH community today. We wish you the very best as you continue to lead in the important work that you do, and we welcome you back to our WeCOACH community anytime. Thanks for listening to episode 4 of the WeCOACH podcast, season 5. And thank you again to our sponsor, Huddle, and production partner, WIS Sports. Please join us again on August 11th for a sneak preview of our WeCOACH Enhanced Member Benefits program that we're rolling out in late August. Follow us and share your comments on Twitter at WeCOACH and at WIS Sports, or on Facebook at WeCOACH Sports and at WIS Sports. Interested in learning more about any of our upcoming events, resources, membership, and donor options? Please visit our website at wecoachsports.org. Until next time, keep moving the numbers. We teach, we inspire, we motivate, we lead. WeCOACH.